Ready? Everybody ready? Okay. I'd like to go ahead and call to order the special joint meeting of the Water Commission and City Council for Tuesday, September 12th, 2023. For the audience here tonight, the City of Glendora utilizes a hybrid meeting format that allows people to participate both in person and virtually. So in consideration of others, if you're here, please silence your phones and refrain from speaking unless called upon. If you're on Zoom and it's during public comment, you wish to speak, please use the raised hand icon. Let the record show that all 5 council members are present and accounted for. And then I will turn it over to Mike Holmes to open your meeting.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting us here for this important discussion and the good works of the Public Works Department, especially the Water Division. We're grateful to be here, and we note the absence of our chair, Mr. Hanson. We'll miss him, but he is under the weather. So.
Okay. With that, I will go ahead and open public comment. Is there anyone in the audience? Did we get any cards from anybody?
I do not have any cards, Mayor.
Okay, I recognize all the faces out there, so, okay.
And
Is
we
there
do
anybody
not-
on Zoom?
We do not have anyone on Zoom, Mayor.
Okay, then I will close public comment. And I will, we'll go to item number 1, the only item we have on the agenda tonight, but it's going to be interesting and a little detailed. Going to get an update on the City of Glendora Water Infrastructure Assessment and Rate Study. And I understand, Chisholm, you are going to be leading us tonight.
I will.
Welcome.
Thank you. And good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, City Council, members of our Water Commission. As mentioned, this is an update on the water infrastructure assessment. This has certainly been a long time coming, something we've been working on for the past 2 years. And so very excited to report this to you, get your feedback. As always, that is something that we appreciate. Okay, so really the outline for today's discussion, this was a 2-pronged approach. In addition to the rate study, we did a comprehensive water assessment of our infrastructure. This is all of our pipelines, reservoirs, and then from those components, we were able to develop the comprehensive rate study. So I will talk a little bit about the results of the assessment. And Marie, our Administrative Services Director, will talk a little bit about the proposed water rate adjustments and the potential customer impacts and where we go from here, what the next steps are. And I should also mention, we also utilize the assistance of AKM Consulting Engineers they were the consultants that assisted us in putting this together. And we do have them online to help in assisting in fielding any questions if there may be any. And so these were some of the key components that we wanted to retain in the forefront as we really embarked on this initiative. Firstly, we wanted to develop rates that were fair and equitable. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means later on in the presentation, but also rates that will allow us to continue to fund our capital improvement projects, as well as our existing infrastructure operations and maintenance. Something that we can stand by, something that's defensible, that will allow us to have a stable and predictable revenue. And also, we were very sensitive to the potential cost impacts to our customers and our residents. You'll see we went through several iterations and options to really determine the best, what we feel is the best option in terms of allowing us to mitigate any potential cost hikes, as well as continuing to reinvest in our infrastructure. And then lastly, just a rate structure that would allow us to continue to be a great water conservation community. And so this outlines the legislative history and previous actions that that fundamentally impacts the rate structure. Firstly, in 1996 was the state adoption of Prop 218. This outlines essentially that the revenue that we collect from providing water services, and the rates that we collect must be proportionate to the cost of providing such service. Also outlines things such as the reporting dates. We must update our residents. We have to have a 45-day notice before we make any type of rate modifications or adjustments. In 2016 was our actual comprehensive rate study. And then 2 years after that in 2018 was the state adoption of AB 1668 and SB 606. This is mainly surrounded around water conservation, the urban water use objective, and really trying to make conservation a way of life here in the state. And so we kept that in mind as we were developing our rates. And again, we'll talk about how we implemented that in our rate structures. And then in 2021 was the last rate adjustment. And just to be clear, this was just a CPI cost of living adjustment, not a comprehensive rate study. And then, of course, in April 23 was when we last completed our assessment. Just to touch a little bit about our Glendora, our water system here. And again, this may come as a reminder to some folks, specifically on the Water Commission. But we service an area of about 11 square miles. And that encompasses a population of about 45,500 residents. Here in our municipality, we do have 52,000 population. So the remaining 6,500 is serviced by a private water entity known as Suburban Water System, primarily on the southwest side of town. We have a total of about 13,500 customers. That equates to about 210 miles of pipeline, 8 active wells, 29 reservoirs, 20 booster stations, and we have 2 comprehensive disinfection plants, one of which is located in Azusa. And so where does our water come from? We are fortunate here in the city that we can attain about 90 to 95% of our water locally sourced from the groundwater basin. That is the main San Gabriel Basin, which is our local aquifer here. During times where we have tremendous rain seasons, such as this year, we are able to meet 100% of our demands from the aquifer. We also do have rights with Metropolitan Water District, that is through our partnership with Three Valleys. And so in times of need, again, during exceeding dry weather such as 2020, we can certainly augment our rights with Metropolitan Water if we need to. We do try to avoid that to the extent possible, being that it is much more cost intensive to get water from Metropolitan. Currently, our groundwater is doing well. Our basin elevation level is about 227 feet. This is about a 43 feet increase from this time last year, and that equates to a total, about 344,000 acre feet of water. And just for reference, 1 acre feet is equal to about 326,000. As mentioned, something that we wanted to keep in the forefront is a majority of the Southwest, American Southwest, particularly California, is still challenged by the prolonged drought. And so this map outlines our existing pressure zones. And pressure zones are critical, especially when talking about rates, because it defines the different elevation rates within our system. We had about 17 zone classes. And so as part of this study, what we actually did was we simplified that down to about 4 pressure zone classes. And so we have zone class A, which is in red. This is the lowest elevation range within our service area. And it houses about 60 to 70%. So majority of our customer base is in zone class A. The next elevation range up is zone class B, which is identified by the blue outline there. And then we have zone class C. And then as you get farther up into the foothills, we have zone class D. And again, we'll talk about the significance of these zone classes when we talk about the different components of our rate structure. So this essentially is just a cross section of the previous schematic. Here you can see the different facilities as associated with the various zone classes. The higher up you go in elevation, the more facilities, the more energy it takes to be able to pump water in between the pressure zone classes. And so this graphic on the right shows the number of facilities associated with each zone class. As mentioned, zone class A, this is the lowest elevation range within our service area. You can see it's about 18 facilities to be able to service this area. And when we say facilities, we mean wells, pumps, and reservoirs. And this is cumulative. So as you go up zone class B, you have the 18 facilities from zone class A, plus an additional 23 facilities for a total of 41 facilities. And subsequently, you have 59 in zone class C and a total of 85 in zone class D. And the graphic on the left, the pie chart there, again, just outlines the number of meters we have in each particular zone class. As mentioned, about 80 to 90% of our residents, our customer base are located in zone class A and B. And so when we completed the master plan, we broke it up into three primary sections. What is known as the horizontal segment, which is our pipeline replacement program. We identified about $183 million of work that we really need to reinvest into those assets. What's known as the vertical facility assessments. Again, these are pumps, reservoirs, and things of that nature. We will need to allocate or reinvest about 45%. And then we have about another 9% in what is known as hydraulic analysis. And again, this is primarily just improving fire flow along the foothills. And so the total proposed CIP from the assessment was about $350 million. And again, this is over the course, this is a multi-generational initiative. So this is over the course of the next 2 to 3 decades. However, for the intent of this study, this was a 5-year schedule that we developed. We did budget about $30 million for this study over the course of the next 5 years. And just talk a little bit more about the pipeline replacement program. Again, this is the majority of our allocated costs for that assessment, about $183 million. The graphic on the right, you've seen this before. This shows the number of breaks that we've experienced in our system dating back a decade to about 2013. And this is on a fiscal year basis. So this graphic is as of June 30 of 2023. You can see in 2016, 2017, that's when we really peaked in terms of pipe breaks. And then we really started to ramp up our pipe replacement program and hence the decrease. However, just due to old antiquated infrastructure, we are starting to see another inflection point, and we are starting to see those main breaks start to go up again. And so it's critical that we reinvest into these infrastructures. And so what we did is we actually prioritized the main breaks based on likelihood of failure. And that's what is shown on the graphic on the left there. We have about 19.2 miles in priority 1. And priority 1 main breaks, we really hope to get a lot of those completed within the first 5 years of this CIP schedule. And then we can build upon that in subsequent years. And this map just shows where within the city we're allocating for projects to be completed within the first 5 years. As you can see, they are just sporadically located throughout the city. And this gives you an idea of where we're going to focus on again in the next 5 years. And generally what we like to do is we couple our pipeline replacement programs with street pavement projects. So again, this gives you an idea of where we're going to repaving our streets over the course of the next 5 years as well. And for the vertical facility condition assessment, again, we allocated about $158 million for these assets. The North Glendora Reservoir, of course, this rehabilitation is already underway. We're about 90 to 95% final design as we speak, and we hope to start that construction at the top of next year, top of 2024. North Grand Pump Station is another facility that was allocated to be repaired or rehabilitated within the next year or so. As well as our wells. And what we look to do is really enhance the production of our wells by either re-drilling a new well or drilling in the existing location, but drilling down to bedrock. Again, and the intent in that is to enhance the production we get from those wells. And then hydraulic improvements. This is just the installation of a number of hydrants. Increasing of pipes to be able to allow fire flow in the foothills. And we also would like to undertake a more specific study for a number of our reservoirs. Shown on this page is Upper Glendora Reservoir A. We'll have to do a detailed hydraulic study to see what types of storage we would need to be able to install for this service area. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Marie to talk a little bit about the numbers and the rate adjustments.
Members and water commissioners. So Chisholm just introduced a whole bunch of repairs to you, and now I'm going to show you how we could potentially pay for it all. First, I'll start off with the fiscal year 24 budget. We have estimated $23.2 million in revenues, but we have about $26.2 million in expenses, netting a loss of $3 million. The use of reserves this year will be covering the difference until rates can be considered. Revenues are categorized into three main sources, and that's water charges, purchase water, and energy. And for expenses, we categorize it into operations and maintenance, replenishment and import water, which is the same as purchase water, energy, debt service, and capital improvement. Then we have reserves. Reserves are saved for emergencies, and the city is required to maintain a certain level of cash balance for our bond covenants. Diving deeper into the elements of the revenues and expenditures, the water fund budget detail provides the dollar amounts budgeted for each line item. Most importantly, out of this whole chart, I just wanted to call attention to the capital projects line item. Since 2016, that rate study was a pay-go style where we would transfer $6 million annually for capital improvements. This year, we could only transfer $3 million because we didn't have the revenue to cover the $6 million pay-go. And so you can see here, in order to balance the budget, we transferred $3 million towards the capital projects and another $3 million being covered by the reserves. How's a dollar spent? This is really important to see how every dollar that comes in is spent, and it shows and illustrates how efficient we try to be in our operations. You can see here over 60%, 67% of the dollar goes into capital improvements and operations, while 17% goes towards the purchase of water, 5% going towards energy, and 11% going towards debt service. This is the best way we can illustrate how efficient the money that we have, how we're using it today, and why we're asking for a rate adjustment. Maintaining an available healthy fund balance is important to the sustainability of the system. Over the last few months, nearly $1.7 million was used from reserves to address emergency main breaks in the city. They were brought to council just a couple months ago. Moreover, we're required by bond covenants to maintain at least 125% of our debt service and reserves. And in order to continue to fund priority and critical infrastructure improvements, it's recommended that the city issue in the amount of at least $15 million in debt to help get a head start on the improvements. Because we've seen over the last few years that we go to bid and the bids coming in are over budget by at least 5 to 10%. And so the longer we wait, the more expensive the improvements are going to cost. So the suggestion and the recommendation is to issue debt to have those priority projects constructed now, and that we pay for it over the long run. This also makes it more affordable in the rates for our ratepayers as well. So now that I've provided the background of the funding requirements, our approach to the rate study was to make sure that we could fund the current operations and the projects identified in the infrastructure assessment, maintain fund balance requirements while being fair and defensible. We evaluated the current rate structure and felt that the components of the rates were appropriate. First, you have the consumption charge, or also called a commodity rate. And it's just that the amount you use is the amount you pay for. So the more you use, the more you pay. These rates are built on the cost of operations, maintenance, and capital improvements. Second is the elevation charge. This covers the cost of energy to pump water to all the elevations and varies depending on the zone that you live in. As seen on the previous slides, the higher the elevation, the more facilities that are used, and thus the energy charge is higher. Those energy charges are associated with all the facilities. And I think you saw on Zone D, there was over 80 facilities being used to pump water into the foothills. So those are just merely passed through directly to the user. And last is the meter charge. It's the fixed by monthly charge that covers all fixed operational costs. So we have consumption tiers here. These are the blocks of usage for which we calculate water usage. These tiers are important because they help us with conservation efforts by putting control back into the ratepayers' hands and the consumers, and also incentivizes conservation when we need to. Our current tiers are 1 to 38 units for tier 1, and anything above 39 units is considered tier 2. We've proposed a 4-tier structure that considers state law conservation measures that allow for 55 gallons per person per day. And for the most part, our proposed first 2 tiers capture the first 2 tiers of our current rate structure. However, anything beyond that would be considered excessive use, and the user will be charged accordingly. Having this 4-tier structure will enable the city to implement any further conservation mandates from the state in the future. And as you can see, each meter charge has a different, or each meter size above 3/4 inch has a different tier based on their usage, because we didn't want to penalize the large water users that run businesses that need the water at affordable costs to run their businesses. Here is the consumption rate. And so based on those tiers, we would charge the rate associated with it. So you could see the first 2 tiers are $2.98 currently and $4.90 currently for tier 2. So tier 1 originally was 0 or 1 to 38 units, and then tier 2 was 39 units and more. So for year 1, we're proposing $1.75 for the first 12 units of water used for your average zone A household. And then for those in using tier 2, which is 12 plus units, those are going to be $2.68. Once you exceed the 38 units, as before seen in the consumption tier table, that's when the rates will start getting higher for tier 3 at $3.61 and tier 4 for $4.54. On this table as well, you'll see the next 3 or 4 years proposed, and those are meant to just provide an idea of what the rates would increase over the next 5 years with an average increase of 3%. The intent is not to increase water rates for 3%, but instead at the same pace as CPI. However, not to exceed 5% annually. And I say that because last year CPI increased by 7%, and the previous year it increased by 6%. So we wouldn't want to place that burden on the ratepayers immediately. And this practice is not uncommon in utility rates. We actually currently utilize this method for our landscape and streetlight assessment districts. Next is the elevation charge. And currently you can see our rates are 24 cents for zone A, 36, 58, and 141 for each of those zone classes. In year 1, we're proposing 22 cents and much higher rates for zone class B, C, and D, given the rate study and the infrastructure assessment on the facilities being used to pump water at higher elevations. Again, shown here is what the next year's energy costs could be using the 3% escalator. But we all know that the water or the energy company and the natural gas company are not increasing at 3% rates. So again, it would be a pass through. However, we would cap it at 5%, again, trying to be fair and defensible at the same time. Here's the proposed rates in combination with the elevation rates. So the first chart is the existing, where you see all our current single family residences or all our customers paying $3.22 for tier 1 up to 38 units and $5.14. That's the base rate plus the energy costs. What we're proposing under the 4-tier system for your zone class A is $1.97 for tier 1, $2.90 for tier 2, $3.83 for tier 3, and $4.76 for tier 4. That captures about 11,500 accounts in the city. Then for zone B on the right, the rates will go up depending on the elevation, and you can see the light blue bars, that's the elevation or the energy charges being accounted in there for those rates. What is a billing unit? So a billing unit is 748 gallons. And to give some perspective, gas is actually more. I took that picture last week. I think I paid $5.25 a gallon yesterday for regular. But here you see a gallon of milk is $4.99. And more importantly, Fiji water for 34 ounces, you can get it for $2.99. And if you wanted to take a shower in Fiji water for 748 gallons, it would cost you $8,500. But if we break it down to us, we're actually 0.002 cents per gallon, and it tastes just as good.
You say that last point, what?
0.002 cents per gallon. Lastly is the meter connection rate, and these are the fixed charges. It's all charged based on the size of your meter and being connected to our system, ready to receive service and water delivery at your beck and call. For the most part, you can see the 5/8 and 3/4 inch meters are decreasing by $3 per 2 months. And then from 1 inch up, those costs are increasing. While those meters will be increasing, the consumption thresholds have changed so that they conserve water and they can counterbalance the increase by conserving water. Most of them are commercial, and we'll be doing direct outreach to them to discuss the changes and offer community rebates that may be available to them. For the largest meters that you're seeing, the 6-inch to 8-inch, a majority of them belong to the city and the school districts. So the next steps. The city council and the water commission are in agreement. The next steps would be to direct staff to proceed with the Proposition 218 process and send out notices, hold community workshops for outreach during the month of October, and conduct a public hearing in November for a January implementation date. But before I conclude this presentation, I'd like to share what I was asked many times in briefing. What is the message we're trying to deliver, and what is the elevator pitch? So here's why we do this. The regular evaluation and adjustment of water rates is a fair and necessary way of investing back into our drinking water system to make critical upgrades and repairs and continue reliable and safe delivery of water to families, businesses, and the community. For example, a really great capital improvement project going on right now is the conversion of sod from Pompey Park to artificial turf. This gives back to the community 4.5 million gallons of water as a continued reliable source of water. That's 6,000 CCF. And then that's enough water to provide water to approximately 160 more homes annually in the city of Glendora. That is reinvesting in the community. And if that was too long and you couldn't remember that, here's one for the hopeless romantics. Over the years, thousands have lived without love, but none have lived without water. This concludes my presentation. AKM and our consultants and staff are on available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Wow. Who came up with that?
I found it on Google.
Okay. Okay, that's great.
A different style of Kyle.
Well, at this point, I'll bring it back to us for questions. I think it'd be appropriate for the Water Commission to go first. You guys are the experts in this and much more involved than we are, but Marie and Chisholm are available for questions.
Great, just a few, and thank you. Very excellent presentation, both of you. Notice admittedly, the high number of water main breaks over the years. Is there a cause of that you've determined? Is it just, and you're addressing that in the immediate future?
No, absolutely. And so there's a number of causes. Obviously, the most prominent cause is antiquated infrastructure, old infrastructure. But also we're noticing, a potential cause could also be poor insulation. For example, you have pipes that are susceptible to corrosion that are not being installed the correct way with, proper corrosion mitigation impact. So one of the things that we're doing as we move forward, especially with the implementation of these new CIP, is we are hiring consultants to assist us with construction management and inspection as well, because the design could be well and great, but if the installation is not as well, that could be a cause for these types of early breaks.
The rest of the infrastructure, the wells, pump station, reservoirs, they're all on a regular maintenance cycle, and that would be part of this to have the interim maintenance they need at the regular cycles to maintain their integrity and their efficiency.
That is correct. As part of this, also, we included what is known as a maintenance package, a maintenance schedule based on ASCE, American Society of State Engineers. And so they basically determine, based on certain factors such as demand, maintenance schedules, how often certain pipes, pumps, reservoirs should be inspected and replaced. And so we want to have a robust operations and maintenance schedule to be able to upkeep those infrastructure as well.
I noticed on the Edison pass-throughs, you had a 3% you were projecting an average and a 5% maximum on the pass-throughs. What if their rates go up higher, which we have no control over?
So one thing we plan on going to council with is an adjustment to our policy reserve to establish a rate stabilization reserve as well. So we spoke about this with our consultant in the rate study to break apart emergency reserves versus rate stabilization. And that would help take care of and cushion some of the increases in the elements that we can't control ourselves, but also stabilize it for all the ratepayers so they're not seeing high spikes in their rates over the years.
Can't we automatically pass through any rate increase Edison or the gas company gives us?
We would still have to go to council for that approval, but establishing that rate stabilization fund is in the better interest of our ratepayers, and also kind of forecasts and provides a safety net for all of us as well. We prefer that rather than passing it through the ratepayers, because going to council, it will cause more people to come forward and be upset. Why didn't we anticipate this? So having that two-part safety net to adjust for that would be a better way to go about it.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Or should I hold it? So one of the questions I had, and thank you for that presentation, it was really good. Same with you, Chisholm. One of the questions I had, and forgive me if I missed it in here, with all the breaks, all the main breaks and all the repairs we've had to do over the years, especially the escalation of that over the last several years. What is the cost, or do you have it calculated? What is the cost to make those improvements as part of this plan, or at least maybe within those first 5 years, versus the estimated cost to continue making those repairs at that escalating rate, at that escalating volume of breaks? Do you guys have that number?
Yeah, so currently on a typical repair, and it really depends. For example, Eagle Ridge, that cost us, almost $1 million to repair that leak. That was an extensive leak. But on average, our leaks, they cost about anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000 per leak. That's including labor, materials, and things of that nature. So, in a given month, we're averaging at this current time frame, we're averaging about 30 to 40 leaks a month. So you can do the math on that. Versus where we can implement a more planned out CIP project, definitely we can roll out some cost savings in that manner.
So I just did a really quick number in my head. That's about $2.5 million a year for repairs. If I did that number correct, based
You
on
did
what
the
you
number
just said.
correct. I haven't done the number, but yes, if you did it correctly, that's
I
correct.
think, don't quote me on it. So let's say over a 5-year plan, I guess over a 5-year plan, if you will, what would be the cost of renovating the system, at least over the 5 years, whatever you can get done over those 5 years, versus that, what would that be? 2.5 times 5.
Right.
I can't do that number, but I
Right.
did the other
So,
number.
right. So over the course of the next 5 years, we've allocated $6 million a year for improvements to our infrastructure.
Okay.
So that's reservoirs, pumps. I would say pipeline repairs is a significant, about 50% of that. So I would say every year we can look to allocate about $3 million a year. And that's really trying to achieve a replacement of about 1 to 2 miles of pipeline every single year.
Okay. And then one other question I had, I don't know if it might be for Maria. if these rates, proposed rates, are put into effect, have you calculated what the estimated revenue increase, if you will, per year would be? I mean, at least
AKM
under
is on
first
the
year,
line. They
second
can
year.
help me with that.
I'm sorry.
AKM is on the line. They're going to help me
Okay.
with that revenue increase amount. I believe it's about 3% annually, but they'll confirm it for me.
Zeki, if you're speaking, you're muted.
Could you please repeat the question?
What is the percent increase in annual revenue with the new rates?
Right now, it's at 3%.
Can you match that to a dollar amount? Do you have that number by chance?
Uh,
It's okay if you don't.
Yeah, what I could do is I can get back to you on what that equates to as far as the dollar amount.
Okay. Fine. Thank you.
First of all, I agree with your goals and appreciate the elevator speech and making some of the comparisons. I would have the same questions that Pat had on what the revenue projections are for 5 years. I have some significant concerns on how this rate increase is been applied. If we're doing a simple math, our revenue at 23 million, we're losing 3 million a year, and we need to capture 6 million, where we've only captured 3 million this year. So we're looking for a 6 million increase to maintain the 30 million standards, as well as a 3 million increase. So we're looking for a total price increase, in essence, $6 million to capture our operating costs and the capital improvements. Based on my quick calculations on the revenue, that would be a 26% increase in our rates. That is a big number, but the fact is that we have not gotten a rate increase these past 2 years, which have seen significant rating CPI increases of 13%. So the not getting a rate increase the last 2 years has put us a little bit behind the cost. But overall, as I said, the targeting rate increase we're looking for to cover our operating costs and maintenance would look at about a 26% rate increase. The rate structures that I've seen, and I very much understand the consumption charge, the elevation charge, and the meter connection charges. I get that. I think it's equitable. I think it's equitable that if you are at a higher elevation, higher cost, that those residents in Zone B pay a higher share. However, in looking at the rate increase structure, it is very unbalanced. Many customers, a majority of customers, would be seeing a decrease here, which is not reflective of the need to capture higher revenue to cover our cost. So typically when doing, in these times of increasing cost, I question why we would be considering rate decreases for customers that are currently in Tier 1 and Tier 2 when we're looking at the cost that we have here. Also, I feel that it's the cost for the metering charges is also very unbalanced for Zone B and further compared to Zone A. It's just very imbalanced when I'm looking at this. And I don't see how we're capturing at a 3% rate increase, bridging the gap for a 26% operating shortfall. And by the way, I have 36 years of public utilities rate application experience in my past. So I have a little experience in sitting in front of councils and going through rate applications and trying to make it equitable and fair and transparent, I think is always the key for a successful rate application package.
Appreciate the comments, Water Commissioner. So next year, we're proposing an issuance of a $15 million bond that will help us bridge that gap of the funding that we don't currently have. It's better than implementing a 26% rate on the ratepayers at this time, all in one. So we felt that debt issuance would help smooth the line and build up that increase. The other part is when we did the rate study, we basically started from scratch. We reevaluated all our operational expenses. And so from 2016 to 2023, We have implemented AMI automated metering infrastructure. Our SCADA system has gotten better. We have increased and leveraged a lot of technology and operational efficiencies to be better. So we've shifted our costs from maybe heavy labor to more technology based. Not only that, though, because of the rate study from 2016, utility rates have increased at different rates as well. And we weren't applying those rates equally as we increased the rates for the first 3 years. And so in all transparency and honesty, we fell behind and not implementing rates for the last 2 years, where we've realized the most increases in COLA and inflation. So while we're trying to even everything out, we had to be very defensible in what we applied to our residents and ratepayers as well. This was the way we found it was most defensible, by redistributing the costs to where the users were using it, and then also recalculating the purchase of water. I believe Three Valleys went up 11% in tier 1 water purchase and 20% in tier 2 water purchase over the last 2 years. And so those are heavy increases that we never accounted for since 2016 as well. And so in order to alleviate major increases on our ratepayers overall, we're slowly implementing them over the next 5 years and taking a different approach of not saying 4% or 3% or pass through. We're really trying to take a more strategic approach and hope that a lot of the projects that we can get done in the next few years will come back and repay itself over the next 10 to 50 years in that way.
You have an updated rate survey from the 2016 survey of where municipalities, our neighboring municipalities are now?
We do. We can send that to you. And the reason why it wasn't shown at this time is because each agency is different. So for example, if we were to compare ourselves to the city of Azusa, we would be much higher because Azusa operates on light and power. They also own a significant amount of water rights in the basin. And so groundwater is cheaper than import water. They're able to provide more groundwater. We have to pay a little bit more if we have to buy water. Every agency has their nuances that we can't compare the apples to apples. We have neighboring cities in the cities of West Covina, San Dimas, who utilize Suburban or a private water company as well. And so a municipal water company versus a private water company, we have to run things a little bit differently. And also our water sources and availability of those sources changes too. So while we can do a survey, we have it, we could provide that to you. Azusa has come out with a recent notice, a Prop 218 notice. Their rates are proposed to be increased the first year at 15% and 9% year 2. And I believe there's other agencies undergoing current water rate studies as well to increase their rates.
The revenue expense includes the one-time cost for the rate.
For the what?
I think some meetings come with
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Kyle's saving me now.
So when we, I guess, so Kyle Johnson, Assistant Finance Director. So when we brought the budget to council this year, the $3 million deficit really is just the transfer to the capital projects fund. So otherwise, we've met our 50% operational reserve. So that still meets that 6 months of water operations that they're still met. We use other additional reserves out of water capital that have been stored there to do primarily pay this year for the North Glendora Reservoir rehabilitation. So I don't know if that.
So just to comment, I mean, unless Greg wanted to jump in. I certainly don't have 36 years of experience on this sort of thing, but just from my evaluation of it, just one person's evaluation of it and the information you presented, it did seem to me equitable in the sense of those with smaller meter sizes that operationally cost less to maintain the system. those in the lower lying zones, zone A, that require less energy to get the water to them. It seemed equitable to me to make the proposed adjustments. I like the 4-tier system better than the 2-tier, and it seemed equitable to me to work to make it equitable for those that are costing the city more to get them water, whether it's energy, pumping, whatever it may be, maintenance of the system. The rates will be increasing over the years, so I assume that, I mean, I know that they've already accounted for that to fund the repayment of the bond. But I do think the idea of taking out that bond to fund this while those rates are implemented over the years, I think is a good measure. And of course, council would have to agree to that. Because I mean, just my first council meeting earlier this year, the very first thing on the agenda was, we had more breaks. We need to increase the budget, ask council to increase the budget. And it just, I just come from a place of strategic, cost benefit analysis. I mean, we can't continue to keep putting money into Band-Aids. We need to fix the system. So again, I'm not looking at it at all from your experience perspective. It just seemed to me to be a good and equitable proposal based on the different zones we have and the requirements and usage and so forth, to fund helping our city in the long term, rather than just, continuing to put Band-Aids on repairs. So just my 2 cents.
Commissioners, any other questions?
I have one. Use this one. Chisholm, I may have misunderstood this, but during your initial presentation, you said that the scheduled maintenance of the major things is being coordinated somehow with the street renovation projects that we also know we need to make. Is that true? And can you tell me how that's being done?
No, absolutely. So whenever we have a water main break that we need to replace, we, as much as possible, we try to avoid tearing up streets twice. So if we can get have to tear up the street to replace the water line, we try to coordinate and plan our street repavement projects and couple that with our water main breaks. We don't want a situation where we, replace a water line, then a month later we're coming back and tearing that up again to replace the street. So that's what is meant by coupling our water main breaks and street repaving projects.
Okay. But I assume the city also has some kind of master plan for upgrading our street
Yes, we do.
infrastructure. Right?
Yes, and we coordinate very closely with our counterparts in Public Works to make sure that we coordinate it too.
Thank you, staff, for your presentation. And Mr. Mayor, we'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, well, I'll bring it back for comments here. Michael, you want to start?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Gary. I wanted to stay on to the meter question because it's come up now twice and I have the same question. Can we go back to slide, I believe 34, where it talks about the meter sizes? And it's my understanding that, so basically in the road, you have either, what is it, a 4-inch and a 6-inch main? And then from there, you have your laterals. Are they all the same size on the laterals?
Laterals are typically about 1.5 inches to 2 inch. It really just depends on the size of the meter, the size of the property.
Okay, so then typically the only time then on the meter size, it's either, most cases, either necking down to a smaller size, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so then where's the cost, except for the meter itself, since the infrastructure is already there? Why are you charging, or why are we charging more just for a separate meter size when the infrastructure behind it is already there?
Well, the meter itself, the cost varies depending on the size of the meter. And oftentimes when we have our customer service group, they maintain the actual meters. And so that's allocated for the cost of maintaining the actual meters, not necessarily the infrastructure behind the meters, but the cost of the actual meter itself. That's tied to the distribution system.
So what is that? Are we amortizing the cost of that meter plus the maintenance of it?
Well, that is correct, because the city provides all of the meters for all of our properties, all of our residents, all of our businesses. We typically provide the meters. Unless it's a private development, we can charge that separate. But for our residents, we are responsible for maintaining our meters.
So anything above 1.5 inches would be a special service?
Well, really anything above a 2-inch. So our meters, our lateral lines are typically 2-inch, and our meters, majority of the city has a 3/4 inch meters.
Roughly, what does a meter cost, the range?
It could range, right? Currently, we're noticing prices of anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 for the larger meters, maybe an 8 or 6
For
inch
1 meter?
for 1 meter. So you don't just have the meter, you have the meter ensemble, you have the meter box, you have everything that's associated with the meter itself, as well as the programming, because if you recall, all of our meters are AMI as well.
Do they vary a lot in different sizes of the meters?
Well, I would say currently the variation is from 3,000 to about 5,000 to 6,000, and we are noticing the cost increase as well on the meter side of things.
Okay. And so on the ready to serve charge, and I guess we're going to rebrand that name. What goes into that?
Well, that's the meter connection charge, which is what we're calling it now. But again, that is the cost of maintaining a meter, the O&M associated with the cost.
Okay, but you're already paying though extra each meter size you're having to pay extra money for the water.
Right.
Then you're going to pay for the other costs as well associated.
So,
with that?
and we can, and certainly can go into more detail. But the assumption is the bigger your meter is, the more water you use, which is the more pressure you put on the system, and so that's what that cost is allocated to, the meter connection charge. But also there's a component of that that's allocated to the actual cost of the meter, meaning the larger the meter itself and not just the water.
So with the smaller size pipes, it's more pressure, which costs you more to pressurize the system as opposed to a larger size, which is less pressure.
Well, right, but again, that cost, the meter connection cost, is allocated strictly for the meters and not the distribution. So we do have in our distribution system, we have anywhere from a 4-inch to a 30-inch. That's not associated with this meter connection charge. This is strictly for the meters.
Okay.
And so to answer your question, Councilman, there's no correlation between the size of the main line, our distribution main line, and that meter connection charge.
Okay, so it basically has everything to do with the cost of that meter and to
The cost
maintain
of maintaining the meter, and obviously the more volume you use, the more pressure you put on the system.
How often do those meters fail and you have to replace them?
Well, I would say on a routine basis, we get about 20 calls a week, but it really just depends. We tend to get more calls in the summertime. But also we have a maintenance program in which we have to read our meters on an annual basis and report it to the state. All of our meters 3 inches and above.
Okay. All right. So is there a baseline year from the state of California that they're using for water usage so they can grade us as far as, because they want 55 gallons per person per day? Is there a baseline that they're using for that? Because they can't do individual folks.
Right. So currently, 2025 is when they plan to start that. But we as an agency, we have to do a number of reporting, and there's a number of variables that goes into that. So that is still developing, and that is something that will keep the council and commission apprised of. Right now, we don't have sort of a set date, regulation, or rule as to how that's going to be developed.
But we don't know what the baseline year is going to be yet.
Well, the baseline, when you said, I'm guessing you mean when it's going to become in effect.
Oh, because we're going to have to report back to the state. They're going to do a calculation based on population to see if they be close to the 55 gallons per person per day. So
Right.
they're going to use a calculation from somewhere.
That I don't know, but I will look into it and get back to you. Again, that is still developing, but I
Okay.
can look into that.
And Maria, you touched on it earlier about the water savings the city is doing, like with Pompey Park and all that. We're going to save a tremendous amount of water. And I believe that's somewhere close to like 20% savings that we're seeing right now. And the residents themselves are probably around 4% savings. So how does that affect back with the requirements from the state of California? And the reason why I asked that question for is because of the previous question I asked of how they're going to implement that grading system, if you will. So if we're going to already have a big decline in water usage, what year will that show up in? And we're going to get penalized for that down the road based on what baseline year they're going to use.
Correct. And so again, there's a number of variables that goes into that. There's a number of variables such as if we're using recycled water. Often we have homes here in Glendora that have medical devices that cannot be in line with the 55 gallons per. They have to take into that account. So there's a number of variables that we have to take into consideration, Councilman. And again, that is still developing. I don't know that the state themselves know what that baseline or deadline is, and that is dependent on each agency to come up with. We've hired a consultant to assist us in developing that as well.
Okay. And I've got several. It's this big item. This is going to be an emotional issue for some of our residents, I would imagine. It was mine this morning. How much water do you think we're going to save by fixing all the leaks? Because there's probably a lot of leaks that we're unaware of.
Yeah, so currently we have, in the month of July, we had about 42 leaks. And out of those 42 leaks, we lost about 600,000 gallons of water. And I should note 28,000 gallons of that was due to the Eagle Ridge. That was an extensive leak. But on average, we do lose about anywhere from 400 to 600,000 gallons of water just due to leaks alone. Of course, that's exacerbated in the summertime. In the winter times, January, February, March, that number is closer to about 200,000 gallons of water. And so the hope is if we can implement these water infrastructure pipeline rehabilitation projects, that number can start to decrease.
Okay. And that's it. When we do the calculation for the state, when they're going to start grading us, I'm going to imagine you have some sort of calculation already, what you've just articulated. I'm sure that's going to be part to the calculation in the equation.
Absolutely.
Okay. So just that alone, if we fix these, it's going to help us on that 55 gallons on that calculation that we're saving more water.
Tremendously, yes.
Okay. So on our budget, I forgot which slide that was. Do we have a calculation for uncollected water bills of what that represents in our water budget?
So we don't have a problem with uncollected water bills. Our delinquency rate is 5%, but we also have the ability to lien property if they don't pay their water bill.
Right, but what is that number on our budget?
We don't budget for that because it sits in our receivables and then it goes to collections. So we don't budget for a loss. We budget for as if we were going to collect all the money.
So then our expenditures are skewed a little bit?
No,
Because are you put that on the expenditure side or the loss side, or because there's probably a line item in there somewhere that you've billed out and then you're not collecting?
right. But we end up collecting it, meaning we budget for it. And we, on the flip side, on our liability side, we account for it there. And so we hold it in the receivables account. It's accounted for in our year-end financials and we eventually collect it. But the dollar amount's pretty small. We can get that for you though.
So you do collect all the uncollectibles,
Almost.
almost 100%?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we talk a lot about the energy costs. Have we ever thought about, since energy costs keep going higher and higher, somewhere around 45 cents a kW, is there any possibility of putting solar into the system for internal use, not back to the grid, to offset some of our high energy costs, which are only going to go higher?
Right. And so we do implement solar for more smaller scale projects. For example, some of our skater reeds from our reservoirs, they have small solar panels. However, that is something that we'll have to work with either Southern California Edison or Azusa Power to implement that on a larger scale. That is certainly something that we can look into to see the viability of.
As like South Hills, you have, a lot of space up there to put solar. I know I first came on board, I wanted to put some solar up there. And you have all this pumping, you got to put those big tanks up there. You have to, 70% of energy is for pumping water. And so if we can recapture some of that energy from Edison and others, I think that would be a wise choice to make. And I would imagine we can find some grants or something for that as well. So the largest thing that I went through this morning, and Adam and staff helped a lot. Marie, thank you very much for what you did with analyzing my bill. The makeup of the bill, the way it's going to look, is different in the future than it is now, because we have zones with letters, and then we have, what's the other one, in tiers. So they're going to show up differently on our bill. Can you maybe explain how that's going to show up differently on our bills in the future if this goes forward?
Sure. I believe there's a breakdown of each component of costs that we charge. So there's an energy component and also the tier and rate component. And so similar to what your analysis looked like, we'll break it down to show you units 1 through 12 and what that calculates out to, and what units 13 to 38 calculate to. So you can see each calculation showing the math basically for how we arrived at the total bill amount. And we can create a sample when we do the Prop 218 notice. And I know that other agencies also currently do that practice, so we can bring in those samples as well.
But the tier brackets have changed dramatically, have they not?
Not dramatically, in the favor of our ratepayers, actually. From 0 to 12 units is your first tier at $1.97 per unit. versus right now, tier one is 1 to 38 units at $3.22 per unit.
But it was almost double that prior, was it not, for tier one? Went up to 68 units before it went to tier two.
So in tier two, it's only up to 38 units. And then for tier
Currently,
three, it
what's
ups,
proposed,
correct.
but not currently.
Correct. It's only 39 plus. That's tier two. And that's at $4.90 a
But
unit.
before that was 68 units, correct?
No. Or wait, let me go back. Hold on.
Current.
Make sure I understand you correctly.
Current is 67. And then I guess you're gonna go up to,
So if you look at a 1-inch meter, it's different than the 5/8 and 3/4 inch. You could see we're still capturing 67 units in the first two tiers.
don't understand, but if tier one is 67 units and your proposed is only 18 for tier one. So to get to the equivalent, you're gonna have to you automatically slide to the next bracket of tier two.
Correct, but you're still paying less than what you would pay in tier two today.
But you're gonna be put into a different bracket.
Right,
though.
so if you look here, tier one is $2.98 and tier two is $4.98. So even if you go to tier two up to the 67 units, you're still only at $2.68 instead of paying $4.98 for the 38 plus units.
Because the cost of the units are lower.
Correct. So it should balance. So while your meter charge may increase, your ability to control your water usage and decrease the cost of that consumption part, thus encouraging conservation, should balance itself out.
I think it's important to note that once you reach that tier one, you only pay for that amount of water you've used in tier one, and then the balance goes into the next
Correct.
tiers, period. So you're paying each bracket. You're not throwing the whole volume into the next bracket.
No. We break it all down. So between 13 units and 38 units, you'd be paying in that tier two. When you exceed that, then you start to go into tier three. And so
The
for that,
excess.
right. And so that one's still lower than the tier two to get you past the 67 units that you were talking about.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Maria, for the presentation. Chisholm, thank you very much. That's it.
Okay, thanks. David?
Yeah, thank you again all, and thanks to the Water Commission for that expertise. It's invaluable. I'll start off by saying I join the encouragement to seek the bond opportunity now as opposed to the pay as we go, because I don't think we can wait. And the infrastructure is not going to wait for us. So let's start now on getting that rebuild, and hopefully the rates will soften that blow. I want to repeat what was said, and I think it was masked in there. It wasn't trying to be hidden, but the public needs to realize they see water at the faucet. They don't see it when they're driving down the streets with all the moguls and the alligators and things. So yes, the water infrastructure repairs will bring along those street repairs that people complain about and see. Even though Mendel Way's already been fixed, but it's got nice new pavements. That's good. Do we anticipate, I guess, to Chisholm, do we anticipate that the parts of the system that are not in the 5-year plan will go 5+ years and not raise their ugly hand looking for attention?
Well, again, this is not set in stone. So our 5-year plan is certainly flexible and can change depending on, certain emergencies that may pop up. But the idea is the way we prioritize this is, yes, we have a 5-year plan based on needs, likelihood of failure. And then we have outlier years. So in the next, 10 years and 15 years in some cases. But again, we want to remain and retain the flexibility to be able to alter and change that as we need.
Yeah, we certainly hope those 10-year folks will stay and wait their turn. So yeah, absolutely. There was a discussion about the cost of the meter, and there's a $3,000 move. Or the meter at our home isn't $3,000. The cost of that meter it's more like $300 or $400 for the meter in the box, right?
Right. So there's a number it's not just the meter, right? So when you have an ensemble, you have the meter, you have the box, you have the programming also associated with it. We're contracted with a company called Census, and they actually do the instrumentation on the back end. So yes, our customers are just seeing the hard infrastructure, but there's a number of costs that's allocated on the back end as well that we have to attribute to that, including labor.
Okay. Having looked into the replacing the meter once, I was told the meter that was coming out would be thrown away because it wasn't worth reprogramming, which I challenged that caution. So maybe that's changed, but I hope so. I do enjoy the opportunity that ratepayers can go online or into some system and do this comparison that we received today, because they're going to ask that coming into a workshop. They're going to be in sticker shock. So if they can have that opportunity to plug in their address and look at today's rating and the proposed rate costs, I think that'll soften the blow to this body from the ratepayers if they can test that themselves and find out whether or not they're really on a favorable or a not favorable side. So I look forward to that and encourage this, and thank you all for a great program, great survey.
Thanks, David. Karen?
Thank you. Thank you, Chisholm and Marie, and to all the staff that helped put this together. And all of the rate studies I've seen, this is the best so far because this is the most accurate in terms of usage. You know, I think that having the advanced technology has really helped. So I appreciate that going forward, that even though for some folks, it may be not as favorable as it is for others, that going forward, it's going to be based on the usage. So you are in the driver's seat on what you pay on that bill based upon what you use. So I appreciate that it is going to be equitable and fair in terms of what is the cost to the consumer. So thank you, and glad that we have moved forward this far.
Okay, Mendel.
Mayor, thank you. And thank you to the staff, and thank you to each one of you guys, because as the mayor said, you all know much more about this than we do. And so thank you for that. Could you just refresh what you said about the last rate hike? That was in one of 21. Was that a 3% hike, or what was that?
It was 4%.
4? Okay. Okay. All right. On the area in our city that is not serviced by us, can you tell us who services that area and what their rate hike is or has been or is going to be? I think that it's a private group, so.
Yes, Councilman. So that would be, again, primarily in the southwest side of town, south of Gladstone, west of Grand, over by the Oakdale Memorial Park area. So that is Suburban Water Systems. And they actually just recently had a tremendous rate hike. I believe they increased their rates by a total of 20%. I want to say 10% in the first year in 2023 and another 10%. And so I don't know off the top of my head what the actual rate breakdown is, but I can get that information and get that to you.
Well, that's interesting to know. I guess my follow-up, did we get phone calls because they thought that the city was doing it, or do they know that the city is not their water source?
Well, to
No,
my
we have
sense, we didn't get any phone calls. Again, I think that's about 6,000 of our residents that's serviced by Suburban. So I don't recall getting any phone calls to that effect.
Okay. Wow, that's a pretty stout hike. On the bond, and I concur with what has been said. I support this. Could you give us just kind of the high level cost of that? And is that baked into our rate increase, or is that baked into another account that Kyle keeps that's way down the list, you know, that by the time we see it, our eyes are blurred?
It's baked into our rate increase, actually.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Do you think that that'll happen when when will those funds hit our books and Chisholm can begin to fix all of our problems?
I would say it takes a little bit of time and then shopping the market.
Yes.
I can't presume anything, but our hope is to get money by next summer.
Oh,
Because we do have existing funding for the projects this year. So we'll go through those with existing projects in our reserve and then issue the bond by next summer. Hopefully, if the market is right.
Kyle is
I was just gonna say
anxious to.
It's in the budget, our last 2-year budget. It's in the second year of our
Okay.
Forecast. So for 24, 25, so that would be consistent with what Marie was saying for $15 million.
Okay.
That was the assumption we made.
Thank you for the simple way that you expressed this rate hike with a gallon of milk and a gallon of gas. I think that we all can understand that. So thank you for, doing that. So in the back of my ear, I hear thousands of people saying, well, what if we don't do this? What am I going to lose that the city is going to, do? So I don't know if Marie, Adam, Chisholm wants to take that, but when it comes down to, it's all about me, right? So what if we don't do this?
Yeah, and I can let Marie and I know Adam chime in, but I think, this is something that was discussed before. We really look at this as a legacy. I think, our founding fathers back in the early 20s and 30s, they built this infrastructure for us so that we can reap the benefits of it, right? And the way we look at this is a multi-generational project, and we need to pay that forward, so we need to reinvest into our infrastructure to make sure that it is robust for our children and our grandchildren for the next 70, 80, 100 years. And so that, to me, that's one of the most significant benefits that I get from this. But also, again, the cost will be significant if we don't. We'll have infrastructure that is run to the ground, that is not working, that will require routine maintenance with a cost that's much more exorbitant than a planned shutdown or a planned project. And so I would say reinvestment into our water infrastructure is greatly beneficial for the community in the long run.
If I may add too, if we don't do this, we won't be in compliance with state law. We have drinking water standards that if we don't meet can be upwards of $10,000 a day in fines. And so we either pay for our infrastructure and have clean, reliable water sources to our residents, or we pay the fine to the state and we get bad pipes, leaks, interruptions in service. And that's what we don't want. We want everyone to be able to turn on the water and feel like they're safe, that in the community, that their major needs are all met and there's no worry about it. But giving money to the feds or the state is not something that we want to do. We want to put it back into ourselves and make our system better for our future as well.
Thank you. The last question that I have is, could anybody here, maybe Pat, you're kind of a marketing guy, but what are some of the thoughts on how we can educate and enlighten folks that are going to hear about this? They're going to go, oh my gosh, there they go again. We've had all of this rain and now they're hiking rates. Can anybody give us kind of a
can you go to the last slide, please?
Thumbnail sketch?
Good afternoon. I couldn't help myself. I had to
Oh, no,
come up here and talk.
I
I sit up here all the time and I just couldn't let Chisholm and Marie have all the fun.
I know.
So if you look there, Mayor Pro Tem, and it's a great question. So as you've heard tonight, the city has lots of requirements, one of which is not an advocacy effort. Our goal is to inform. It's a Proposition 218. We have Proposition 26 that dictate, and you've heard a great deal, a redistribution of costs based on actual findings of the first infrastructure assessment we've had in a very, very, very long time. And so as Chisholm has done such a great job of providing the reason why we need some of the infrastructure, and Marie's sort of provided a great overview of how the money is spent and costs and allocated. What we can do is hold those symposiums and meet with the major services that'll be impacted, or companies and other organizations and talk to them about this, but really it's to inform. And I think like you've heard this afternoon and what can be shared, that is the effort that we can do from a liability standpoint. There's certain advocacy things we can't do.
Right.
Marie, anything that you could think of off the top of your head, for example, that will provide, or the Chisholm website with updated information, a place for people to check their future bills, reasons why the entire plan is to why there's, $300 million that need to be repaired.
Well, yeah, no, I know for one is, education is critical. So we'll have, as part of this process, we'll actually have one-on-one meetings with certain key shareholders, stakeholders in the system, but also just websites. We have events all the time in which we invite folks to come in and learn about our water. I know as part of our water conservation team, we actually go out and we make presentations to schools, inform children about water and the cost savings associated with that. But also we can implement a component of this actual rate study to invite their parents to come or go to our website to learn about any new potential changes that may occur. And then lastly, as Marie mentioned, we'll also put together a sort of a sample bill where folks can go on and understand what the changes are. That way they know what to expect when they receive that first bill.
Right. Well, I think it's, you guys have done a great job, with Pompey Park. I mean, that's a staggering amount of, savings there. To hear that 600,000 that we lose when there's leaks, and that, we won't lose that, or at least we won't lose as much. Those are efforts that I think people really need to, hear about. So really good job. So thank you again. Appreciate it.
Councilman, since you added my name to that list, hope you don't mind if I chime in. I understand, and thank you for what you mentioned about the, not advocacy, but, giving information. I don't know what the process would be for putting out that information and creating that content for a website or so forth. Who in the city would do that? I'm not really sure who that is. I was going to propose, do we have a group of people that we put together to say, what's that message going to be? Because I even made some notes here about what I think that message should be. I would certainly volunteer to be on that if anyone wanted me to, just as another, set of eyeballs and another voice. I think that message and the content of that message is going to be extremely important. I mean, we all do. I'm speaking to the preach to the choir here. One thing I would suggest, and you probably already have it planned, I think directing people to the website is going to be more of a passive effort on their part. I think we need to make it more active and put it in front of them, whether it's a dedicated mailer that goes out, whether it's in the, in the bill. I think it would be far too easy, far too likely that folks are going to see an increase in their water bill, or for those that do see an increase in their water bill, and they complain. Well, it's on the website. Oh, I didn't know. I didn't go check the website. Well, I mean, for whoever pays the bills for a household, I'm the one that does it for my household. I open the envelope, it's there, whatever's with it, I read it. Not everyone will, but you certainly, if you make the message clear enough, it might get their attention of, read this, so to speak. So I would suggest that there has to be something more active out there, mailers, whatever else may be. You all have experience with what else is good from the city standpoint to get the message out there, rather than just the website. I think the website's important too, but I could just see that being missed by far too many people. So if it were me, I would like to see something more active out there. And again, we don't have to do it now, but I had ideas on the kind of content, but obviously it's important that we do that. So anyways, just my 2 cents. One other thing I did want to say, by the way, since I have my mic on, you were talking about the tiers on the bill. I mean, the Edison bill, correct me if I'm wrong, is already like that. I can already see my kilowatt hours in my tier 1, tier 2. I presume ours would be very similar to that, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, if it's up there and it's a graphic on the bill, it should be very clear the volume that's falling into the different tiers.
Yes.
Is that what you were thinking?
Yes.
Okay. One other thing, Greg and I had a little bit of a sidebar earlier, and we were talking about, I had asked the question of what that dollar amount of that increase may be over the first year or two. And what we were wondering is, or what I was wondering is, since it looks like there'll be a bit of an increase for zone A and B, and then increases for C and D, the increase for C and D are going to offset the decreases in A and B from A and B. And so that kind of goes, I mean, correct, right? And so that kind of goes into the question of, okay, well, if we're going to see the increases in C and D, especially for the larger volumes, mid to larger volumes, how much is that going to increase and offset the decreases? Basically, what's the net of that going to be? So that still kind of goes back to that question. I know you don't have the information, but that's kind of where all that kind of comes from. Anyways, it's another question that came up. So, and as far as the what about me, I'm a history nerd, former military. I believe in the social contract. So for me, this is the community we live in. I'd rather put out the money for me, my singular voice, to put out the money instead of putting on a bunch of Band-Aids. So I wholeheartedly believe in that. So I know it's not going to satisfy everybody, but nonetheless, I believe that that's what it comes down to. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Anything else? Got a couple questions and then we'll go one more round. First off, I want to clarify, Chisholm, correct me if I'm wrong, but the 55 gallon per person per day goal that the state is looking at is for indoor use.
That is currently indoor use, yes.
Okay. So there's really no guidelines for outdoor use yet.
Not yet.
There has been some conversation in the past about going to a 2-meter system that you could possibly be sub-metered for outdoor use. Is there anything come of that? I mean, it's one of those things I'm not quite sure how that would be implemented.
Right. And again, to be honest, Mayor, this is something that we are working with the state on, whether that's going to be a 2-meter system, how that's going to go about, who's going to fund that. But that is something that we'll continue to monitor. Right now, nothing is set in stone. The 55 gallons per person on a daily basis is strictly indoor, and that is what is the focus at this point.
Okay, appreciate it. Got a question about the debt service in the chart here. We're talking about 11% debt service of our expenditures. Is that with or without the $15 million bond that we're talking about?
That is without. However, with the increase in revenue, the percentage of that dollar would remain about the same.
I'm sorry. You lost me.
Meaning as revenues increase, so would the dollar amount. And so in proportion to the expenses, that 11% would remain about the same. We're only looking at maybe another $2 million in debt service added on to our existing $4 million. We currently pay $4 million in debt service. And so if we issued another 15, that's about another $2 million in debt service that we would have. But in comparison to a $26 million budget, the percentage of that is incremental to how it would shift.
Okay, so help me. What's the debt service that we're paying on now?
We have 2 bonds. One was issued in 2012, and part of it was for the sewer system. And then we have a refinancing of one that was done in 2016. It was originally issued in 2008, and that was for infrastructure as well.
And how much total were those bonds? We know?
We're almost done with those. So those will be done in 2030. I don't remember what the original issue was.
It's not that important, but it's just,
I think one of them was originally $12 million. I know the 2012 was $12 million.
okay. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the numbers. 11% seems extremely high on a $26 million budget.
No, I mean, it's all comparison. We've worked in other agencies where that number is much higher. Think of that as a capital expenditure. So instead of paying your annual escalating CPI costs on that number, you're paying a fixed rate for costs for work that you're going to be doing up front. So while it truly is an operational expenditure, it was paid for or put in place for capital costs. So really, even though you're in an increasing interest rate environment, if you can get more of the work done, you basically save on that interest rate. So while it could appear high, it's actually not very high in comparison to other agencies as well.
Okay, so maybe I'm misunderstanding. The debt service is the interest only that we're paying on those.
No, it's
No.
the
Oh,
whole
the
entire
debt service
loan.
is
Is the
paying down
cost.
the bond.
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yes,
Right.
yes.
Okay. Excuse
No,
me.
I understand why that's confusing. That's a great question.
Lost me there. Going back to the meter connection rate. I'm assuming that there's some study or behind that to try to come up with exactly what those numbers are.
Yes, and I can defer that to Zeki to speak to the specifics of it. Zeki, you're on mute.
Certainly, thank you. Meter connection charge pays for fixed expenditures, including debt service and salaries, benefits, and customer service. So these are expenses experienced by the utility. And the cost is distributed to the customers based on what we call an equivalent residential unit. So we take the water used by 5/8 inch and 3/4 inch meters, and the average of that constitutes a residential equivalent residential use. And then we divide the other meter, the other size meters, water uses to the 3/4 and 5/8 inch meters, and that gives us equivalent residential units for the other meters. So it represents how much water is used and how much of the system is used by the various meter sizes. And then the cost is divided by the number of equivalent residential units, and then allocated accordingly. So it is a fair and equitable way of providing that cost.
Okay, so just to be clear, it's not based on actual cost. It's
No.
based on some sort of a formula depending
on
on
the
the
system.
amount of water usage.
Right. So what he's saying is each meter based on that size is calculated into a equivalent unit. We call them ADUs in some cases when we're doing assessment districts, the value of their benefit. And so as you get larger in those meters, what he's saying is our typical is 5/8, 3/4 inch meter. When we calculate that, we're saying incrementally, what is that maintenance cost, that fixed charge that goes on each meter as you get larger, because it's a bigger demand on our system that meter is having. And so we're giving them that incremental cost to it. Yes, it's a calculation.
Okay, so my question is, when we created the ready to serve charge a number of years ago, did we use a similar formula? Or my understanding was we tried to come up with actual cost to get water to somebody's property before that was the purpose of the ready to serve charge. So it sounds like we may have used a different formula this time around.
We still use the same formula. It's just costs have increased as well, right? So it's fixed charges. We went through all our expenses and we said, if someone is not using water, what is still the cost that the city incurs for having a water system? And so we took that and said, okay, for a majority of our accounts, if it's the 5/4 and 3-inch meter or 3/4 inch meter, this is what it would cost. And from there, they calculated the benefit and the demand on the system as it goes up based on all those fixed charges. Because we still have to recover what it would cost the system even if we weren't running it, theoretically.
Right.
Did I
Listen,
answer
need
your
to jump in
question?
For a second there, that doesn't make sense equitable, because if someone has a bigger meter but doesn't use the water, the stress on the system isn't there.
They have the potential to have that.
Potential, so you're charging someone for potential and not actual. So how's
Can
the equity
defend
of
it
that?
in Prop 218.
Correct.
And I hate to say that, but then we'd have an administrative nightmare going in calculating every single individual usage every single month.
So those who want to conserve are getting penalized.
No,
They're not getting.
if you use less water, your cost is less.
That's for the
Your
water, but
fixed
you're still
rate cost up front is more. I think a different way to try to look at it is houses sell in Glendora. Sometimes you have a family that lives there. Sometimes it's an individual. You have deaths in the family, which leaves one person. It would be impossible to do all those nuances each and every time. Similar to refuse service, doesn't matter if it's 2 people or 10 people, so long as the trash fits in those bins, it's the same cost. And so it's a similar methodology. So a lot of what was shown earlier is variable in nature. Costs more money to push water uphill, right, on the electrical side of things, but the actual usage, you have the ability to reduce your overall cost by consumption. And that is the
But
variable.
not by fixed cost.
No, nor would you ever in just about anything we do.
Get a copy of that calculation sheet of how that works.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, so because I'm a little confused as well. So my question is, we've got somebody in a situation with a property that's using zero water, but has a water meter at their property. They are going to be paying a fixed cost per month. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay.
And the way I kind of think of that too is on your property tax, there are all those fixed costs. So even if your property assessment is really low, you're still going to be paying those other things that somebody with a bigger property tax would pay because it's some of those fixed costs.
I understand, but in this case, because it's based on a percentage of actual usage, it's not an accurate number.
That's not.
Not of usage, of the
help me here. I'm
fixed
I'm
cost.
struggling with this.
Fixed cost. So in our budget, we have fixed costs versus variable costs. Variable is based on the amount of water we deliver because people use it. The fixed costs, we break it up. So those meter charges are based off of the fixed costs. So we all have our labor. Customer service exists whether or not you use it. I think there's some operational costs and maintenance of the system that exists whether or not you use it. And like Adam had said, because we go through the Prop 218 noticing for water, trash is the same way. It's all a I would say byproduct of property ownership. So even if you don't use trash service, you have to pay for trash service. It's in the health and safety state code. Same with water. Even though you may not use water, you have to pay for that ability to take water because we could red tag your house if you don't get water there. Sewer is the same way. There's only 3 utilities that were ruled during the Bighorn case in 2006 that said all these utility rates have to go through this process because it's a product of being a property owner. And so with that comes the fixed charges that we can charge to capture for the system.
But the analogy for the trash cans is we all have the same size trash can.
Not
No matter how much we
necessarily.
put into it.
That's not true either.
Some people may have larger trash cans.
Well, and and again, I don't want to beat this dead horse here, but the point I'm trying to make is, or that I'm trying to understand, is that we had to use a formula to come up with this. And I thought the answer to the question was the formula that we used was based on water consumption.
The
No.
formula we use is based on fixed operational costs for water meter charges. The rates, the tiered rates, these ones were based on consumption.
Okay, that the meter connection rate with the larger meters, the question is, was that based on the actual cost to get water to the location? Or was that based on the overall fixed rate and divided by a percentage of water usage?
It's the overall percentage, I'm sorry. So take fixed costs. And so we calculate what your typical would use, your 5/8 and 3/4. There is an equivalent usage unit for larger meters, similar to an ADU. Like you can have one property, but one property would be equivalent to multiple EBUs, right? Equivalent benefit unit. It's that same methodology. So if you have a bigger unit, that's equivalent to more demand on the system. Even if you don't take that water, the capacity exists on the system. And if someone were to use it, it's available at that point in time.
Okay, so we're basing it on the possible usage of water that they
Yes.
might have. Okay.
Yes.
And I wasn't arguing the point, just trying to understand it because people are going to ask.
Yeah, no, it's a great question.
Okay. Last question or more of a comment. When we take a look at what we're dealing with here, we're really going to have under 1,000 of our customers are going to be affected more dramatically than the rest of us.
In year one, yes,
Yeah.
correct.
And so as we move forward with the outreach, I really think it'd be a good idea to have 2 tiers of outreach, because I think it'd be much more important to, have something more substantive for the people that are going to be affected the most. We're going to have people that their rates or their bills are actually going to go down. Those people, I'm not sure we're going to hear from a lot of them. But I think it's important when we look at the numbers, and it's a relatively small number in the overall case for the outreach, to make sure that we address that. So those were the only questions that I had. Does anybody else have anything? Mendel?
I have one more. This is, I think, really to give staff a chance to educate all of us and those that may or may not want to listen. But when you sat down and the consultants were in the room, and they have to prove that they're worth whatever they charge, you guys started at some point. Can you tell us kind of where you started? And
Sure.
I mean, we know where kind of the train stopped, right?
Right.
But it would be interesting to hear maybe some of the ideas that were out there, because I think, as Gary said, and as we'll all face, people are going to ask us, well, how did you get here?
Yeah. If I can just start out and let Chisholm and Marie kind of go through. So I think we cost Chisholm and Zachy, who's on the call, probably several years of their life by asking so many questions. I think we have to start with the fact that we haven't had an infrastructure assessment at this level of detail, granularity, whatever you want to call it, and substance in a very long time, more than 20 years. And so starting with the increase in main breaks, looking at the need to rethink how we've done our rate study was kind of the basis for how we got into this. As Chisholm and his staff led the effort to do the analysis, to do all the flows, to check the pressures of the system, to understand where it's going, to look at capacity, future growth patterns, working with Jeff, we came up with a list of priorities of the project. So there are 300 million. Is it a third that's tier 1 required?
That is correct.
So $100 million in a perfect world of projects that would be done over the next 5 years, really in the next 3. Well, it's physically impossible for us to shut down the streets and do all the repairs necessary. There's not enough people to do the work, let alone impacts on the streets to be pretty tremendous. So we're looking at 30 million, right, over the next 5 years, when if we had all the money in the world and all the staff in the world, we'd be looking at something 3 times that amount over that period of time. A rate, I think when we did it, Marie, it was like 2.5 times what was here if we had to fund something like that all at once, even if we had to do it, issuing debt or do pay-go just by cash. And it was just the number was so outlandish. Not that anyone would say it would pass, but I mean, that's the type of investment that's needed in our water system. It is decades of infrastructure that should have been done that wasn't, for any number of reasons, both bad and good. So that's where we started. And then from there, we got into methodology, and we had a long conversation about, were certain users subsidizing others, right? How are we able to explain this without knowing that we would end up in a position where some ratepayers may actually pay less? We started from a place of, if we had to stand before the public, and I always use the example, if you had to stand in front of your mother and explain something, is she going to get mad at you, right? So we went back and forth, and I think 5 different iterations of rates before we even decided to meet with the Water Commission and City Council, behind the scenes trying to figure out different ways with the overall costs of driving down potential rate impacts on the customers across the board, both residential and commercial. Do we issue debt? Do we have all cash? Do we do all debt and no, what do we look at in those scenarios? So with that as the background, I think we had about 6 months of internal negotiations back and forth of Zachy and his staff on the call, presenting with work done with Chisholm to Marie and myself and Moises and other staff trying to make it work. So, behind the scenes, it was a great deal of peeling back every layer of the onion imaginable to try to come to where we're at today. Marie, Chisholm, anything to add to that?
No, I think you hit it on the nail, Adam. I mean, we've been working on this literally since my first day here at the city. So, and that was about 2.5 years ago. So, we're very excited to be at this point. And it was a collaborative effort between all city departments. And so we just actually appreciate the efforts.
So one last thing, and thank you for, saying that, because I think that people or most people will understand if there's a logic and if there's been work put into it. So how did we land on 15 million instead of 25 million? Because the logic would say, well, we could do more and we would have less leaks and Chisholm could have a better life because he wouldn't be getting calls at midnight, So can you help us to understand that? Was it just a dollar thing that we can't afford more, or what?
So I'm one for quotes today. In my water career, I had a really great general manager share with me, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. So we definitely fought through these rates to land where we are. So it was definitely a fight of trying to balance the needs of the system also with the needs of the residents and trying to find where that happy medium is. We actually tested 10 million, 15 million, 20 million, and 25 million. And we looked at all the rates and how that would go across to our residents, being considerate of when we roll this out, how many people are going to be banging on your doors saying what's going on here. And so from a needs of our infrastructure that we knew our fund balance was going down, we knew we had heavy projects on the list, and we also knew what we could handle internally as far as capacity and resources. That $15 million would be the sweet spot in terms of rates and in terms of what we could actually get done. And so it was a mix of a little bit of that. The 10 million was just not enough. And we also are anticipating the cost of doing business and projects over the next couple of years to increase. We know that the cost of concrete, there's a shortage and there's an increase in 20% because of state laws that have AQMD issues. We know that contractors are backed up. They're short with labor and everybody wants them right now. We know that the cost of doing business now in terms of maintenance contracts, we're seeing everybody wanting to go to bid. And when we go to bid, we're looking at prices that are 10-15% higher, that we're sitting down and going back to them and driving down prices saying, look, we'll give you 5 years if you can give us a better deal of a commitment here. And so looking at all those things, it was like, okay, ×5, Zeki and his team were like, Marie, you're running out of chances. And so their contract was going to go up and have a change order there. So it was really, okay, I think we've hit the right spot. I think this is something that is going to benefit not only our residents, but also our water system and meet the revenue needs that we need to start getting those projects done. And so you don't see leaks in the roads. We know being proactive is much cheaper than being reactive. And so this is how we landed here.
Yeah, and I think if you took that quote and put it in the modern vernacular, that Starbucks is made with water. And so if you go from whiskey to Starbucks and you want to have it, you need the water. So you need to pay for it.
Michael?
Chisholm, this is a follow-up question. You mentioned you have outreach to other folks with education and things of that nature. Do we offer facility tours?
Yes, we do. We do offer facility tours, not only for our facilities, but also for with our partner agencies, Story Valley's Municipal Water District. We haven't had much since COVID, just due to the circumstances, but we are starting to start that back up again.
So how do people know about to get in touch with who if they want to go on a facility tour?
So what we'll do is, as part of this rate study, and we'll work closely with our PIO, and we'll develop a strategic communication plan. to educate folks, again, not only on this, but on getting access to facility tours, where to, what that process looks like, where to apply and things of that nature.
So I know that on our streets, we have our PCI rating for the grading of the streets. We talked about this before. We don't have one for the water. Is it possible to put one for the water since we're going to another step? We're basically trying to rebuild, you might say, the system with a new push. Is it possible to put some sort of rating system in so we know how our water system is?
Right. We do have a rating system. It's a prioritization system that we use, priority 1, 2, and 3. I mean, we can certainly look into maybe refining that, developing something a little bit more granular that we can present.
So we know where we are today and where we're going to be going. So
Sure.
when we do this and we put the money towards it, we're seeing a report card of improvement.
Absolutely. And no, I think the biggest indicator of that is also tracking our leaks. You know, we track that on an annual, monthly basis. How much water are we losing due to leaks? And so we'll certainly be able to track the progress as we implement these pipeline rehabilitation projects of what that looks like. And that's something that we can certainly report to our water commission on a quarterly basis.
Thank you.
I would just add, as part of the assessment, we do have a citywide map that shows the priority levels of all the various streets, both the vertical assets above ground and the horizontal assets below ground. So we'll be able to provide some GIS maps potentially in the future to sort of share where both street and water projects will occur.
Will be kind of nice. So we have that, but as far as a grading system, because we know that we had an improvement in our streets,
Yes.
PCI rating, be kind of nice to have that of granular.
Absolutely.
Okay, I've got one last question. We saw this report, very detailed. We're looking at $350 million in improvements over the next 2 to 3 decades. Just to try to put that in perspective, if we were building the city of Glendora today and we had to build an entirely new water system, do you have any idea what that would cost? When David cashes in that $1 billion lottery ticket that
There
you're
you
holding
go.
on to,
It's going on your permanent record, Chisholm. So we're going to see if you nail it.
Yeah, well, I would say something close to that amount, you know, because again, when you take into consideration just the increase in costs, you know, yeah, I would say, don't quote me on this, but close to, I would say $1 billion. I'm not sure what our asset costs or calculation of worth is, but again, if I was to guess, that would be my guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, just thinking about, so in reality, we're talking about improvements, probably 30% of our system,
Yeah. And I think it's also important that 300 million is in today's dollars.
of course.
So, I mean, when you think long term, I mean, that number out of pocket costs is 500 million over the next 20 years. So, yeah, I think over $1 billion is absolutely accurate.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I guess if I'd gone back 6 generations and asked my ancestors to do a better job, we wouldn't be sitting here.
We
would we?
wouldn't be here.
I think it's them that did a great job. I think somewhere shortly thereafter.
Yeah. Okay, well, anything else from you guys? Yep, Pat.
I had just one question. You said just a few minutes ago that you think the majority of the residents will understand because they'll be the ones with the rate decrease. And I agree with you on that. I think the message is still important because of the misinformation and the gossip that goes on, right? Folks are gonna hear, oh, there's a rate increase. So I got this mailer, rates are going up. And they're going to artificially talk about rates going up without actually knowing that their rate's not going up. So that's why I think that message needs to just be abundantly clear and very well laid out, however it is, so that they understand based on the knowledge of it, and therefore they give the right information out. Otherwise, as you said the last time we met, you're going to be standing in Vons and someone's going to ask you the question, and just hopefully they ask you the right question.
Yeah.
So I just have that concern of that happening, and that's why I think that message is extremely important to get out
No,
there.
I understand completely. I was just thinking that some people are going to be affected more than others, so there might need to be some additional outreach to.
Oh, absolutely,
to
that
a
too.
certain percentage.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's absolutely the intention. I think for those of us who have done this a long time, as much as we think everyone will be totally reasonable, the fact remains that 98% of people will care if their costs go up or not. They don't care about the details, and understandably so. Everyone's busy, right? And so on our mailers, I think we've done a better job of late of saying you're receiving a public notice and here's why. For more information, please visit. Here's a QR code, a website, a social media address. And we try to track those things. And inevitably, while we do have a great return on those, not as much as you would hope or like, and inevitably it hasn't happened of late, but up until 6 months ago, I'd get a call once a month saying they're building a train in town. I'm like, do you live here? Yes. Okay. So, it happens. And I think we try our best. I know Chisholm will be doing a lot of tours, it sounds like, and everything. I just want to say it was really important for us and for everyone to know that we don't take something like this lightly. There's a lot of us in the room that work for the city that are also residents as well that will face, rate changes. Understandably, anytime you throw out the words fair and equitable, people, especially in today's world, roll their eyes. But our goal was really to try to lay out the most common sense plan total, possible, and say it costs more money to push water up the hill. We have a gravity fed system. This is how this works, and this is how we're going to explain it. So definitely lean on everyone's advice here and go out with as much of a campaign as possible. We'll all stand in front of the public and, say, here's why your rates are being changed and here's why. So, Mayor, Vice Chair, if there are any motions you'd like us to consider, we're happy to work with you on any of those as well.
I'd like to make a motion.
No, I have a question for clarity first. So can you clarify, adopt the water master plan and provide direction and consideration of water rates? What actually do you want us to do? Or asking us to do, because you want the whole thing to start the process all over right now, or adopt this report?
So
Maria, I was gonna say, can you click to the last slide?
Yeah.
And just to show what the next steps are.
you have to adopt the water master plan because that becomes an infrastructure document for the city. The
That
second
includes the
part,
rates.
no, that's just the infrastructure assessment. The second portion is provide direction for the consideration of water rates and fees. That's the Proposition 218 process. So if you all agree tonight, that's telling us go ahead and proceed to mail out the notices and begin the process of community outreach and scheduling a public hearing in November for the rates to be heard. Allow our residents to come forward and speak if they'd like, and then adopt the rates at that night for implementation in January.
You don't need us to adopt the rates now. We have to go through the process of the
Correct,
hearings.
correct.
Thank you.
There's a large public information process that would start based on council direction.
Okay, so to be clear, is the commission and the council voting on this together? Is it two separate votes or?
We can do two separate votes. If the commission would like to make a recommendation to the council, council can also make a recommendation to staff. Or council can just make the recommendation. It's up to both bodies that are here this afternoon.
Okay, well, let's start with Mike. Does the commission want to make a recommendation?
You want to make a recommendation, advisory recommendation to the council on this? Recommendation to adopt the master plan and then to proceed with the Prop 218 process.
Yeah, I make.
I guess we'll go ahead and do that.
Can I get a motion?
I make motion to adopt. Sure.
Yeah, so part then adopt the water master plan and then proceed with the Prop 218 process. So, okay.
So I have a motion from Commissioner CC and seconded by Commissioner Holmes.
I didn't, but I'm happy to do it. Thank you.
Okay. And then for council, I have a motion from Councilmember Friedenthal and seconded by Councilmember Karen Davis.
Excuse me, point of order, doesn't the water commission have to vote on that separately?
Okay, we'll do them separately. Thank you. So with that recommendation, I will now conduct oral roll call. So Commissioner Lammers.
Again, I jumped into a lot of details. I'm going to vote no because I haven't seen what the revenue impact and what this is. Support very much the efforts, but I don't support this the way the allocations are being made.
Commissioner CC,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Holmes.
Aye.
Let the record show for the recommendation, 3, 2, and 1 no, and then we have 1 absent.
And then,
And then for
Okay.
for council, we have a motion made by Councilmember Freedenall and then seconded by Councilmember Davis. And I'll now conduct oral roll call.
May I add
Councilmember-
an adjustment to that?
Sure.
On the second part, I would like to have us respect the sensitivities and discussions about the education process, the outreach to the public, that we consider those, we take advantage of offered expertise to help us land this. I would recommend that we take every opportunity to do those.
Councilmember Alves,
I'm gonna vote yes, but I still have a problem with how we calculate the meters. But yes.
Councilmember Davis,
Yes.
Councilmember Freedenall,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Thompson,
Yes.
Mayor Boyer.
yes.
Let the record show 5-0. Motion carries.
Okay. Well, thanks to everybody involved. I know there was a lot of work to put all of this together and to try to get us to understand it. So great job, everyone. And if there's nothing else, we are adjourned at 5:55.